We have been speaking in terms of the Four Noble Truths that Buddha taught. It was a basic structure of his teachings about the true sufferings that we all face, true origins of them, that it's possible to attain a true stopping so that they never recur. And in order to have that happen, we need to follow a true pathway of understanding, realizations, and so on that will bring us to that goal. And we saw that in terms of true suffering, we're not speaking just in terms of suffering, which is our ordinary unhappiness, or the suffering of change, which is our ordinary happiness that never lasts, never satisfies, never have enough, etc., and turns into the all-pervasive suffering of uncontrollably recurring aggregates, body and mind, and so on. So uncontrollably recurring rebirth. And aggregates here we're speaking in terms of body, mind, feelings, distinguishing, and other affecting variables. And these are tainted in the sense that they are derived from unawareness of how we and everybody exists. And the description of the true origin of rebirth, this samsaric rebirth, we saw that if we go into that in more detail, it's described by the mechanism of the 12 links of dependent arising. And we looked at the definitions of each of these links yesterday. We saw that in order to attain a true stopping of uncontrollably recurring rebirth, that we need to stop and get rid of those links within the 12 links which are going to perpetuate our rebirth. And so we saw that rebirth occurs because of the compulsion of karma. There is the compulsiveness that causes us to act or to speak or to think in either destructive ways or, we use the Western term, neurotic constructive ways, like being a perfectionist and so on. And that builds up various potentials and tendencies and habits, and that when these get activated at the time of death, then there is that compulsion to grab out for more aggregates, for another rebirth. We saw that this compulsiveness, this compulsion is brought on by disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes. So we have, in general, vast quantity of so-called primary and secondary disturbing emotions, such as longing, desire, attachment, greed, anger, naivety, jealousy, pride, arrogance, etc. And we also have disturbing attitudes, and disturbing attitudes are like always throwing out this net of me and mine onto everything in terms of identifying ourselves with one or another aggregates, or that I'm the possessor of them, or that they're mine, etc. Quite a list of these disturbing attitudes. These cause us to act in a compulsive way, and they also activate the tendencies and potentials for rebirth. Specifically, the ones that activate it are thirsting, which is a subcategory of longing, desire. It's to when we experience happiness, it's not to be we thirst not to be parted from it. When we experience unhappiness, we thirst to be parted from it. And when we experience a neutral feeling, like being in a deep trance, we thirst for it not to degenerate or decline. We also have these obtainer disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes, because they're what are going to obtain for us another rebirth. In terms of disturbing emotions, that was longing, desire for some sense object that we want to hold on to, that could prevent us from dying. At least we imagine it will prevent us from dying or make us feel better. And there also was a whole list of disturbing attitudes. Some of them had to do with disturbing attitudes concerning rebirth, and what would continue with rebirth, whether there was no rebirth or no consequences of our behavior. And the most general one was this, again, this throwing out that net of me and mine onto everything. The technical name for that was the deluded outlook toward a transitory network being our aggregates. Deluded attitude is identifying it as either being me or mine, my body, me, the possessor of this body, that type of thing. And we also saw that underlying all these disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes is the unawareness of how we exist, we and others, persons, individuals. And on that basis, then, of course, we feel insecure, because either we don't know how we exist, or we think that we exist in some impossible way, which is inverted or contrary to the way in which we actually do exist. And because we feel insecure about that, then we have these disturbing emotions. If I can get stuff to me, that will make me feel secure. If I can get things away from me, somehow that'll make me secure. If I am in a state of denial, naivety, that anything can affect me in terms of the consequences of my behavior, that'll somehow make me secure. If I could just go off into some, transcendent realm, that will make me secure. There's all sorts of disturbing, strange emotions and attitudes that we could have. And then also in terms of this thirsting, if I can get, we're thinking just on a trivial, not a trivial, but a superficial level, if this ordinary happiness that I have, if it could just not be parted from it, that'll be fantastic. Whereas it's impossible, because ordinary happiness doesn't last and it turns into suffering. Or if I could be parted from this ordinary unhappiness, that without having to do anything, just make it go away. This type of thing, that it'll be away forever. This again is very naive. Or this deep trance that I have, that it'll never decline, that it could last forever, which of course it won't. You can't suppress the emotions, disturbing emotions, forever. But that'll somehow make me secure. Or latching on to things as me, as if, that body, the youthful body, that's me and that'll last forever. That, of course, is futile. Or that this is mine, this money is mine, and if I can have enough money, I can buy a long life, or happiness, or something like that. This also is futile. So all of these things are involved with our compulsive behavior then, and that brings on and generates more and more tainted aggregates and further rebirth. It's just going to be the basis for experiencing the first two types of suffering, unhappiness and this ordinary happiness, which goes up and down. There's never any certainty, there's never any security, and it's very unsatisfying and unpleasant. We then went into the discussion of that first link, the unawareness of how we exist. And we saw that there are actually three levels of impossible types of me that we project onto our conventional selves. And then we imagine that we exist in that impossible way. But as I use this word, it's impossible. It doesn't refer to anything real. It doesn't correspond to anything real. But because we imagine that we exist in this way, then because it's impossible, you can't possibly make it secure. So all of these various mechanisms that we use to try to make something that doesn't exist at all secure, doomed to fail and just brings suffering. In the presentation of these, we grasp for ourselves to exist in these impossible ways. Grasp means that because our minds make it appear like that, as though we exist in that way, then we perceive it, feels like that, and we believe that it is true. And what we have to understand is the technical term is a lack of an impossible soul of a person. What we imagine ourselves to be is some sort of soul that is, by itself empowering us, establishing us as a person, and that's impossible. That word soul is the word Atman. I can't think of any other way of translating it that conveys the flavor of what an Atman is in our own languages. So some type of soul. And it's impossible. That, there are impossible types of souls or selves. In Buddhism, we do accept that there is a self, and that word is also used in Sanskrit as Atman, but it is doesn't exist in these impossible ways. We'll see how it does exist as we go along. We do exist. That's very important to realize. Otherwise, we go to that extreme of nihilism. If I don't exist, then it doesn't matter what I do. So there are serious consequences that follow from thinking that we don't exist at all. Now, we first spoke about this coarse, impossible soul, first level, and that was a type of soul or self that was doctrinally based. We had to be taught about that. We saw that also. I should mention in review that these three levels of impossible soul or self are all present at the same time in terms of how we imagine we exist. We grasp for ourselves to exist in that way. And you have to unpeel successive layers of what's impossible. So it's a progressive type of deconstruction. When you get rid of belief in the and grasping for the coarsest level, then you're left with the two subtle levels, and you get rid of the subtle level, and you're left with the subtlest level of what's impossible. So we have to go, to the full depth of what is the problem, and that often, you'll find in Tsongkhapa's presentation of discussion of voidness, which is a total absence of these impossible ways of existing. There's no referent object to it, so it's totally absent. That he speaks about neither under-refuting or over-refuting. Under-refuting means that you don't go to the deepest level, and over-refuting means that you get rid of the deepest level as well and you're left with nothing. That literally, we don't exist at all. Nothing exists. So you have to avoid those two extremes. We have doctrinally based unawareness or a doctrinally based grasping for an impossible soul. It's something that we had to be taught. And then we have automatically arising unawareness or grasping. which automatically everybody has, including the dog. In general, we speak here about this course impossible way, and that's a doctrinally based one. We have to be taught it. And we are taught it by the non-Buddhist Indian schools of tenets or assertions, whether we've studied it in this lifetime or not. Because of the beginningless rebirth, we have all been taught this at some point. And in this particular lifetime, we might have just part of it in terms of incorrect consideration of things. We might have other strange ideas that we were taught by other doctrinal systems from our Western religions or Western philosophies or materialism, these sort of things. But those are just part of the picture here. And when we speak about the doctrinally based unawareness or ignorance and the doctrinally based disturbing emotions that arise from that, we're talking about belief in the whole package of all the assertions about this type of Atman or soul asserted by these non-Buddhist Indian traditions. And we saw that there were three characteristics of this: that it is a static, unaffected phenomenon. We're not talking about it being eternal or not. Buddhism asserts that the self is eternal, so that's not the problem. Eternal means no beginning, no end. The mental continuum has no beginning and no end. The self imputed on it has no beginning and no end. But here it is that that self is static, never changes, is unaffected by anything. Second point is that it is a monolith, a monad, has no parts. It's usually translated by the word one, but that means that it has no parts. It's literally the word one. And the third assertion is that it can exist independently of a body and a mind, so that it can become liberated and exist in some sort of transcendent realm with no body and no mind, no aggregates. So that's the type of self that is being refuted here. And based on believing, identifying ourselves as being this type of self, that's me, then, of course, we are either, imagine that we are identical with a body or mind, that's static and, unaffected by anything, eternal youth type of idea, I'm my mind, or that this Atman, which is, sort of just coming into a body and mind, is manipulating it and using it, and eventually wants to become free of it. So because of those type of beliefs, then we have disturbing emotions. That's my body. I'm very attached to it. We get angry if anybody offends us or hurts us or anything like that. We become very defensive, etc. So there's all the disturbing attitudes and emotions can be based on this type of belief. So that was what we were speaking about yesterday. And just as an introduction, we'll go through the three types of impossible self, and then we'll, depending on how much time we have, how much detail we'll go into in terms of the refutation of each of these three. In order to understand them more distinctly, what you have to do is to see when we have refuted this first level, the coarse level of an impossible self, what are we left with? And then you look at what we're left with in order to see what further has to be refuted from that. This is the only way to really understand the whole sequence of refutations, of deconstruction that we have to do. So if the self is not static and unaffected, nothing affects it whatsoever. So now we are left with that there is a self which is affected by what it does, what happens, and so on, and changes from moment to moment. It is has parts. It's not monolithic. And actually, to understand this, we have to understand that the third characteristic is not the case. The third characteristic, remember, was that there was a self which was independent, could exist without a body and mind. So now we have the understanding that there's no such thing as that. And so the self is dependent on a body and mind. It always has to be dependent on a body and mind. And it is imputed on a body and mind. And we looked a little bit yesterday, about what imputed means. That word imputed can be translated as designated or labeled onto something. And we saw with the example of a tendency as something else which is also just imputed, that it is a what can be based on successive moments of something similar. Successive moments of something similar, and we'll use the example of smoking a cigarette. Smoke so many times, and then on the basis of that, we can put it together and say there's a habit of smoking, or a succession of minutes, and you put it together, it's an hour. An hour doesn't happen in any of those specific moments, and so on. Well, an hour is a collection of 60 moments in that, so this is not exactly analogous. But time in general is something which is, imputed on a succession of moments, change. So, like that, we have a succession of moments that follow in a reasonable sequence in terms of karma, in terms of what we experience. These are moments of individual experiencing of things. And on that basis, to put it together, we can impute me, or designate me, or label me, an individual. So it can't exist separately from that. There's no such thing as an independent me. And because it is imputed on an ever-changing continuum of moments of experience, then, of course, because those in each moment is different, it's changing from moment to moment, and what happens in moment A affects what happens in moment B, then you'd have to say that the self, which is imputed on that, also changes from moment to moment and is affected by what happens and what you do. And it has parts. It's not, there's yesterday and there's today and there's tomorrow, me. So it has parts like that. So this is what we're left with, right? Now, well, digest that for a moment. This is the common assertion in all of Buddhism. He is imputed on ever-changing sequence of aggregates. Changes from moment to moment. It's affected by what we do, what happens, and it has parts, because there are the five aggregates, there's the body, there's the mind, it's imputed on all these things. And of course it lasts forever, because the mental continuum lasts forever. That's not the issue. Okay. Now, even though we understand this, that the self is imputed, is non-static, as parts, and so on, nevertheless, what automatically rises is this feeling and belief that the self is, the term is self-sufficiently knowable. It can be known by itself without any aspect of the basis for imputation also being known at the same time. It can be known by itself without any part of a basis for imputation being known at the same time. As in, I see myself in the mirror. Well, you can't see yourself in a mirror. You can see a body in a mirror, and on the basis of the body, you impute me. But it doesn't, it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't seem like that. I see myself. I see you. I know you. I know Tio. Well, how can you know Tio? Separate from something about Tio that Tio is imputed on. Appearance, personality, even just the name. It's imputed on something. You can't know a person independently of a basis for imputation, but we never think like that. And the classic example that I always love to use is, I want you to love me, for myself. Not for my money, not for my looks, but for me. As if you could love me. I'm trying to find myself. What in the world does that mean? I was not myself yesterday, I was drunk. Well, who were you then? As if there was a me that could be known or discussed or perceived or anything like that on its own. And it appears like that automatically. It appears like that even to the dog. And based on that, then again we have all sorts of disturbing emotions and, activating karma and so on. I know you, and now I love you, and I want you. Don't ever leave me. What is it that's don't ever leave me? Your body don't ever leave me, your mind, your personality, what? You, I want you not to leave me. So that clearly is diluted, isn't it? So that's that's much more difficult to get rid of. So that's the automatically arising one. Let's just digest that for a moment. Okay, maybe I should ask if you have any questions on this, since this is important to understand.
This is the same one as the Atman?
Atma, is it the same one as the Atman? All of these are called Atman.
Okay.
Any Atman is just the general word for a soul or a self.
So what I mean is this impossible way of a self is the same that you were talking about with the Atman as this?
Well, is it the same as what I was talking about before? It's a different level of Atman. It isn't the one that we were taught by another system, by a non-Buddhist system, I should say.
Yeah.
It's what automatically arises. Everybody has. So that's another level of an impossible Atman.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is anatma, a lack of this impossible soul. No such thing.
Right. So this is one aspect of.
This is a deeper aspect.
Yeah.
And normally we have both. And so when you get rid of the coarse one, you're left with the more subtle one that's still underlying it. That's why in order to identify it, we need to first refute the coarse level and see what's left. So an imputed self that is non-static, changes moment to moment, has parts, nevertheless could be known all by itself.
What does refute mean?
Pardon? Refute means to prove that there's no such thing. Yeah.
Okay. Is this the Madhyamika approach, or is this?
Is this the Madhyamika approach? This is common to all of the Indian tenet systems.
Okay.
We'll get to Prasangika next. Yeah.
I guess I'm confused about what you're saying about the sort of simultaneous arising of seeing the basis and seeing the self. Or is that what you were saying, that this automatically arising thing is, we see the basis for imputation and what is imputed at the same time?
Well, this is what she's saying, is it that we, this whole thing of the simultaneous arising of the basis and what's imputed on it, that in fact, what we do experience is that you can only know what is imputed on the basis when the basis itself also arises. I can only see you when I see your body, a body. I can't see you without seeing a body. I can only think of you if I think of what you look like, or I think of something about you, or I think of your name. I can't just think of you.
It's radical.
It's radical, yes. But it seems as though we can. And that is deceptive, because that doesn't correspond to reality. There is no me that can be known by itself. Yeah.
When, with regard to thinking and reflection,
With regard to thinking and
reflection,
reflection,
how who am I talking to when I'm thinking? Which sort of self?
when we are thinking, who am I talking to, it is as if there were two me's inside. So that's even more diluted. The one who is the author of the voice, and the one that you are scolding, like, why don't you get yourself together and do this and do that. So that's a complete fiction. As if there were two independently existing me's, the one who's the policeman and the one who's the criminal, or the naughty one. All that's happening is that there is the arising of a mental representation of a sound in a mental cognition on which you are labeling me, and imagining that the me is the one that's talking, as if it was sitting there with a microphone and talking, which is absurd. But we don't even analyze it, do we? To see the absurdity of it. What should I do now? As if there's a me sitting inside that has to plan and decide and push the buttons of what we should do now. What do people think of me? As if they could think of me without thinking about something about me. So you see how automatically arising it is. I mean, it's there all the time. Most of the time, I should say. Yeah.
So what is it that if we don't have an Atman, what is it that travels on?
Well, we do have an Atman, but it doesn't exist in these impossible ways.
Okay. And
You know, what are we left with? It's an Atman that is merely imputed on the aggregates, changing from moment to moment, has parts, and can only be known simultaneously with a basis.
Mm.
So
But-
that
but
you
when
have
it-
to see, well, is there still something, you know, weird
When it
about that?
leaves- When it leaves the basis from one to another, what's that?
When it leaves the basis from one to another, it is never a time
Mm.
when it leaves it is in free space independently and then in another one. That's this idea that there can be an independently existing self
Mm.
separate
But like
from a
injecting-
body and a mind.
That's why you have a kind of Bardo body also, because you need a basis for.
Well, Bardo body, there's a basis, sure.
Oh,
And even
okay.
during death existence, at the moment of death, there's still the subtlest mind and the subtlest energy. There's always some basis.
It's all, okay, so the basis changes.
Basis changes from moment to moment.
What's a Bardo body?
A Bardo body is in the in-between period between death and the next rebirth. It is an in-between state, and the body is very, very subtle, like a dream body, but not exactly the same.
So there are non-physical bodies.
There are non-physical, there are subtle physical bodies. It has a form. It looks like something. So it's physical, form of physical phenomenon. Like a dream body has a form. It's not, you know, gross material type of body.
What about formless? Formless realm?
Formless realm has just the subtlest energy. Yes.
I didn't finish my question before.
You didn't finish your question, sorry.
That's okay, but there are those two voices, the one that asks and the one that responds. It's basically the same voice.
Yeah.
In my head anyways.
Right?
But there's also a kind of a knower. There's kind of like a witness that never has a voice, but is always there. That's how I experience it. Does that have to do something with this monad or?
Well, the fact that there are within us, well, let's not use that expression, that terrible expression, in the moment, in our moment-to-moment experience, that's all that's happening, right? Moment-to-moment, presently happening moment of experience. In that moment of experience, there is the arising of a mental representation of a sound, of language, of a voice. Can we impute the conventional me on this? Yes. You know, I'm experiencing this. So now, what you are projecting onto that are, in this sense, from what you have described, a sequence of three type of impossible me's that exist independently of each other and independently of, you know, what's going on. One is the speaker behind the microphones, you know, the author of the voice. One is the me that is being spoken to, like being scolded, you know, oh, that was stupid what you just said. And then you describe a third one, which is a witness, which is just recording this, in a sense. So is that this whole idea of parts, you know, that the self has parts? Well, you're talking about parts of an impossible me. You know, that these exist independently. So it's not quite, you know, that's not quite what we mean when we say that the self has parts. But the self can be imputed, you know, while you are having this moment of experiencing, of thinking, self can be imputed on that. The self is also imputed on your body. You're sitting there thinking. So in that sense, there are parts in terms of the various aggregates that are involved in that moment. But when you start, multi-projecting impossible me's on this, then those aren't actually part. Your belief in all of these would be parts, but those selves don't exist. That's a figment of your imagination, projection. There's a separate me and the naughty one that's being scolded, and somebody standing on the sideline recording it as the witness. See, the problem is that it feels like that. Because it feels like that, you believe it. You believe that it corresponds to reality, and then you get very, schizophrenic in a sense. But you're always scolding yourself, and that's a very unpleasant state of mind. That you have to be the policeman, watch yourself. As if there was a good me and a bad me. Very dualistic. So that's a very unpleasant state of mind, isn't it? Not very relaxed. Yeah.
When I do a meditation on this topic, I think often I come up with a wrong conclusion, though we're not supposed to necessarily find a conclusion every time. But I often get the feeling that I deconstruct the aggregates and the mind and the body, and what I always feel like I'm left with is awareness. So that always feels like that's me, that's what I am, awareness.
That you deconstruct the body and the mind, and there's awareness besides the mind.
Yeah, it feels like that there's awareness watching the mind, that is aware of what's going on in the mind. That's what I feel like when I do it. But,
Right, so here it's very interesting that he's saying when he does meditation and says, well, the self is not the body, the self is not the mind, and then you're left with the self who is the awareness that is doing the meditation or being aware of this. Well, first of all, you are not at all thinking in terms of a self being imputed on any of this. So you are identifying the self with one of the aggregates. So the self is not the body, the self is not the mind, so now you're saying the self is identical with so-called awareness of what's going on, as if awareness and mind were separate, but we won't go into that. So you still haven't understood imputation.
no.
So that's the fault in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds impossible to put words on. But isn't okay? So awareness doesn't exist independently.
Well, what does awareness mean? I mean, if you're talking about the in some of the Buddhist tenet systems, you have something called reflexive awareness, which is a part of each type of, each moment of cognition, which is the recorder, in a sense, that is aware of the cognition itself, which accounts for memory. And the Prasangika school of tenets refutes that. It says that there's many logical contradictions in having that type of separate function or faculty that they describe explicitly, and explicit cognition and implicit. Actually, these are two variables that are only with apprehension when it's accurate and decisive. But explicitly, you know the object, and implicitly, without it actually appearing, you know that the cognition occurred. So you don't have a separate function that is doing that, but it is implicit in what you are, how it is that you remember. And again, how memory works is going to be slightly different. So, you have to realize what is actually to remember something. And this gets into the whole idea of tendencies, and you have a tendency to think about a certain incident. And so each time that you think about it. You know, now this gets very complex with the no longer happening of the incident and so on. But each time that you think of your mother, you remember your mother, well, there is the category mother, but the what arises as an appearance of what represents your mother, or what represents that scene that you experienced. It's going to be slightly different, but based on the fact that there are recurring occurrences of this. Remembering, you say that there was a memory, but it's not as though there's something, you know, sitting in your head.
But isn't voidness cognizant, or like in the subject?
Is voidness cognition? No, voidness is an object of cognition. You are aware of voidness.
Okay.
Voidness is an absence of impossible ways of existing.
Okay. Yeah, like.
And let us not get into the distinction between self-voidness and other voidness, please. That's totally irrelevant.
Like in the Dzogchen teachings, they talk about.
Forget about Dzogchen teachings. That's not our topic. You will get confused when you try to bring that in.
Okay.
That's what I said. Don't bring in, when you're trying to understand a complex system, don't try to bring in things from other systems. You'll just get confused. They don't fit into the puzzle. There's a puzzle, and we have all the pieces of the puzzles, you know, a jigsaw puzzle, and you're trying to put in a piece from another jigsaw puzzle. That's another explanation. Perfectly valid, but it's a different explanation. One of my teachers, Geshe Ngawang Targe, always pointed out one of the big faults of Westerners is that you're always trying to compare two things, neither of which you understand.
But I'm trying to understand. That's why.
Only when you understand one very thoroughly can you then try to compare it to something else.
Okay, but you say voidness is an object.
Voidness here, we are speaking in the Geluk system,
Yeah.
Sangika system.
Something like that.
In all the Geluk, you know, ways of describing, they only speak of voidness as an absence of impossible ways of existing.
Okay.
We're not talking about a, you know, Rikpa, you know, pure awareness, or, you know, subtlest level of consciousness, which is devoid of grosser levels. That's a completely different topic. Yeah.
This word prasankika, you're using it a lot, and what does it actually mean, or who is it?
Who is it?
And what's the deal?
Okay, tenet systems. They're within the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism, as studied at Nalanda Monastery in India, which was the greatest university, monastic university in ancient India. They studied various systems of interpretation of the Buddha's own teachings, the sutras. So Buddha taught many, many different things. He spoke to individual groups or individual persons and taught and explained to them in ways that would suit their level of understanding and their backgrounds. Because of that, there are many, many different explanations of the same thing that on the surface look quite contradictory. So then you had Indian masters later on who then wrote commentaries and put together various aspects of Buddhist teachings and explained it in one particular way. And so these are the so-called tenet systems. A tenet is a system of philosophy, philosophical assertions. So at this monastic university, You get the study, and different masters specialized in one system or another system. Some did 2 systems, but in any case, at this monastic university, you studied the assertions of each of these different schools of thought. In India, they didn't really exist as separate schools. When they've got to China, they were made into separate schools. But in any case, so you have 2 which are within the so-called Hinayana teachings and 2 which are within the Mahayana teachings. So the 2 within the Hinayana teachings are called Vaibhashika and Sautrantika. The 2 within the Mahayana assertions are called Chittamatra, that's mind only, and Madhyamaka, the middle way. Within Madhyamaka, the Tibetans then made a differentiation between Svatantrika and Prasangika. And they even made a distinction within Svatantrika of 2 sub-schools, Yogacara Svatantrika and Sautrantika Svatantrika. So you get within the, and to make it even more complicated, each of the Tibetan traditions had their own interpretations of each of these Indian systems. So, and each of these 4 traditions aren't a monolith either, so there are different authors and different subgroups, and they have their own interpretations. So we get a wide variety of explanations, which you shouldn't mix but just understand each one as a whole, a holistic view of each one. The way in which the Tibetans study this, regardless of what tradition of Tibet we're talking about, is in a graded order, that each of them are successively more sophisticated and more subtle than the ones before. It's not clear that that was studied that way in India, but the Tibetans eventually have studied it that way, and that's the way that they present it. So the Prasangika, from the Gelugpa point of view, the way that the Gelugpas explain Prasangika, within their system, that is the most subtle, the most profound of the 4 views. That's what you ultimately want to get to. You have a question mark and a balloon over your head.
Yeah. On the last part you lost me.
Within, well, Prasangika, yeah, the Gelugpa, Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, Gelug. So the Gelugpa, that's what we're talking about here. It's a Gelugpa center explaining Gelugpa. They have their own very special understanding of Prasangika, which is totally different from everybody else's. So forget about everybody else's. And there are further divisions of Madhyamaka that you have in Nyingma and Kagyu. They divide it differently. Different system. Within the Gelugpa sphere of all these 4 tenet systems and their subdivisions and so on, Prasangika is the ultimate, deepest, most profound view. If you really want to attain liberation or enlightenment, that's what you need to understand.
And that's the Lamrim.
No, Lamrim is a general presentation of the stages, which you find in many traditions, not just Gelugpa, as a general way of organizing the basic sutra teachings.